Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. The storm that night was like something out of a movie, the kind that people talk about for years, remembering the sound of the wind as it whipped through the trees and how the sky looked like it was about to swallow the earth whole. In Florida, storms like that are common, but this one felt different. I was sitting on the couch in my small one-story house. The houses here were far enough apart that I usually didn't have to deal with much noise from the neighbors. But tonight, the wind was howling so loud that it drowned out almost every other sound. The rain came down in sheets, and I could see the trees bending under the pressure of the wind. I tried to focus on the movie I was watching, but the storm was too distracting. There was something unsettling about it. Maybe it was the way the storm seemed to hang in the air, so thick you could almost feel the weight of it pressing in on you. Or maybe it was the fact that the lights in my house kept flickering, like they were about to go out any second. I kept glancing at the power meter, half expecting it to die out, but somehow the lights held strong. I wasn't sure for how long, though. I could hear the trees scraping against the roof, branches banging against the shingles. The wind sounded like it was crying as it whipped past the windows. My house wasn't built for storms like this. It wasn't much, just a small, cozy place with old hardwood floors and an old-school air conditioner that made a racket every time it kicked on. The walls creaked and groaned every time the wind picked up, and the windows rattled as though they might shatter any second. It was kind of beautiful in a way, if you weren't alone. But I was. I was used to being by myself, and I'd spent many nights in this house without a single thought of danger, but tonight, something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt heavier, like the storm itself was carrying something with it. I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself it was just the weather messing with my mind, playing tricks on me. But then I heard it. A knock. It was faint at first, just a light tap, 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 but it didn't stop. It came again, louder this time. A slow, deliberate thump, thump, thump. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Who the hell would be knocking at my door at this hour? I glanced at the clock, almost midnight. There was no way anyone should be out in this weather. I didn't even know anyone well enough around here to expect a visit, and none of the neighbors had ever come over unannounced. I couldn't figure out why my heart was racing so fast. I didn't even want to go to the door, but I forced myself to get up. My feet felt like lead as I walked across the room, the floor creaking with each step. The wind outside was howling louder now, rattling the window panes and filling the air with the smell of wet earth. The rain seemed to pound harder against the glass, almost like it was trying to warn me. I stood in front of the door, staring at the peephole. My hand gripping the doorknob so tightly, my fingers started to ache. I took a deep breath and peered through the tiny lens. What I saw didn't immediately register. There was a man standing on my porch. He was soaked to the bone, water dripping from the ends of his hair and down his rain-soaked jacket. His clothes clung to him, his jacket hanging off his shoulders as though it was too big. His face was partially obscured by the hood, but I could still see the outline of his features. A rough, weathered face with a hint of stubble and sharp eyes that seemed to be watching me, waiting. He wasn't a stranger exactly, but I definitely didn't recognize him. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. Something about him didn't sit right, and I immediately felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. His posture was too still, too calm for someone who'd been caught out in a storm like that. "Hey," he called out, his voice cutting through the roar of the wind. "Sorry to bother you, but my power's out and my phone's dead. I live 2 houses down. Any chance I could step in? My mind raced. 2 houses down? I didn't recognize his face or voice. My gut was telling me not to open the door. Not him. There was something off about the way he asked. I wasn't about to let a stranger into my house in the middle of the night, especially not with the storm the way it was. I stepped back from the door, trying to stay calm. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," I called through the door. "I can call an electrician or something, but I'm not letting anyone in right now." There was a long pause after I spoke. I could hear him shift slightly, his boots making a soft sound as they scraped against the porch. It wasn't until a few seconds later that he spoke again, and his voice was different this time. Sharper, more insistent. "Nah," he said, sounding annoyed now. "I just need to get inside. It's freezing out here. Please. I won't be long. Just let me in." I could feel my pulse thudding in my neck. My stomach churned. There was something in his voice that didn't sit right, like he wasn't asking anymore. It was more like he was demanding. "Sorry. I can't," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. I took a step back, my hand reaching for the deadbolt again. I didn't even know what to make of him. I could hear him breathing heavily through the door now, the rain hammering behind him like a backdrop to the tension. Then there was silence. I waited for him to say something, to give some sort of explanation, but he didn't. There was nothing but the sound of the rain and the wind swirling outside. My fingers trembled slightly as I slid the deadbolt into place. I glanced back at the peephole, expecting to see him leave, but instead, he stood there. He didn't leave. He just stood there, staring at the door like he was waiting for me to change my mind. My heartbeat thudded in my chest, my palms clammy against the door. I couldn't look away. Every instinct in me was screaming at me to move away from the door, to run and hide, but I couldn't tear myself away from the sight of him standing out there in the rain. And then, finally, he stepped off the porch, but he didn't leave. Not completely. He just stood there, out in the rain, staring at the house, watching. I couldn't see his face anymore, but I knew he was still there, standing perfectly still like a shadow in the storm. I kept my eyes on the door for what felt like forever, my body tense. I wanted to call someone, to do something. I wanted to scream, but something in my throat wouldn't let me. I didn't want him to know how afraid I was. And then he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned around and walked away into the night, disappearing into the downpour like he had never been there at all. But that didn't make me feel any better. I waited for a while, just to be sure. I didn't trust my own instincts anymore. I didn't know if he was gone or if he was just waiting for me to let my guard down. My heart raced as I waited in the dark. The storm continued to lash against the windows, the wind wailing louder and louder. Finally, after a long time, I texted Mr. Gibson, my neighbor from 2 houses down. I had to know. "Hey, did you send someone over here? A guy in a raincoat, power's out, phone's dead, asking to come inside." I waited. Every second felt like an eternity. My thumb hovered nervously over the phone as if I could sense something bad was coming, and then a message pinged back. No, I didn't send anyone. I felt my blood run cold. That's when I realized how bad things had gotten. I didn't even know who the man was. I didn't know why he had been there, but I had an awful feeling that I had just narrowly avoided something dangerous. My head was spinning, my stomach twisted. The silence in my house seemed louder now, and the storm outside felt less like an act of nature and more like something sinister. Just as I was about to sit down and collect myself, I heard it. A loud crash, the sound of glass shattering. It was inside. I didn't wait to confirm. I bolted to the bedroom, my heart pounding so loudly I could hardly hear anything else. I grabbed the closest thing to a weapon I could find, pepper spray, and held it in a white-knuckled grip. I checked the locks, triple-checked them, but I knew it was already too late. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. They were slow, calculated, I was paralyzed with fear, every nerve in my body on edge. I dialed 911 as fast as I could, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly hold the phone. I didn't even hear the operator pick up. All I could hear was the sound of footsteps getting closer. The doorknob rattled. I held my breath, waiting, praying it wasn't happening. Then, a voice. "You should have just let me in." My heart stopped. The door rattled again, and then came the first kick. Hard, forceful, the entire door shaking in its frame. The second one cracked the wood, splintering it. I couldn't think, I couldn't move. I had to get out. Without thinking, I scrambled up to the window and flung it open. The rain poured in, soaking me instantly, but I didn't care. I climbed onto the ledge, my heart in my throat. The wind was fierce, and the drop wasn't far, but it felt like an eternity before I finally jumped. I hit the ground, the shock running up my legs, but I didn't stop. I ran as fast as I could, my legs aching, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I knocked on a neighbor's door and stumbled inside, gasping for air. I could hardly speak. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone as I dialed 911 again. Minutes later, the police arrived. They searched the house, but it was clear the man was long gone. My bedroom window was shattered and the place was ransacked. Drawers pulled out, things overturned. The police couldn't find a single trace of the intruder. The experience haunted me for months after that, especially on stormy nights like this. Every time the wind howls and the rain starts to pour, I feel that same knot in my stomach. The memory of that knock, that voice, it lingers. It's funny how you remember things, isn't it? The way little details, the smallest moments, can stick with you long after they should have faded from your mind. Sometimes I wonder if certain memories are meant to stay with you, like they're seared into your mind for a reason. I'll never forget the night I saw the man with the red umbrella. It was late, really late. The kind of late when everything feels still, when the world seems to hold its breath. The rain was coming down in thick sheets, like someone had turned a faucet on full blast and just let it pour. It wasn't a light drizzle or the kind of rain that made you want to stand under a tree for cover. It was heavy, relentless, and cold, the kind that soaked you through to your bones. Every drop hitting the pavement made a steady, rhythmic sound that was almost calming. But that night, it only seemed to add to the tension. I was standing at the bus stop in Florida, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. I had been there for what felt like forever, waiting for the last bus to take me home. I wasn't worried about the time. I had a habit of being late at work, and I usually didn't mind the quiet ride home. But tonight was different. There was something off about the night, something in the air that made me feel uneasy, even though I couldn't place why. Maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was the empty street that stretched out ahead of me, the kind of empty you only see in late-night cityscapes when everything is closed and no one's around. The street lamps buzzed faintly above, their dim light barely illuminating the sidewalk. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 12:37 a.m. Another 5 minutes until the bus was due, but I had already started to feel that creeping impatience. It was like time had slowed down. I looked up, glancing down the street. Nothing. No other people, no cars, nothing. Just the rain, falling in sheets. And then, across the street, I saw him. At first, I didn't think much of it. There was a man standing across the road, holding a red umbrella. It wasn't unusual for people to be out in the rain, especially when you're waiting for a bus in a city where everyone seems to be rushing home. I glanced at him for a second, thinking maybe he was just waiting for someone, or maybe he lived nearby. But what caught my attention wasn't just that he was standing still. It was how still he was. He wasn't checking his phone or shifting his weight. He wasn't looking around for shelter or even moving to adjust his umbrella. He was simply standing there. not even looking down at the rain, but staring straight ahead. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't help it. It wasn't just that he was standing still, it was the way he stood. He looked so out of place, like he was watching something I couldn't see. The umbrella, bright red against the backdrop of the storm, seemed almost unnatural, as though it didn't belong to this place or time. The more I looked at him, the more I started to feel uneasy. Something about him didn't sit right. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, it was late, the rain was heavy, and I had spent the day dealing with stressful things. Maybe I was just imagining things. So I turned my attention back to the bus schedule, telling myself I was overthinking it. But then I looked back up, and he was closer. Not by much, just a few feet. A small step, but enough for my stomach to drop. He hadn't moved much, but it was as though he had inched closer without me even noticing. He didn't seem to be walking, just standing in the same rigid position, but somehow he was closer to me. The feeling of being watched returned, like sharper this time. I couldn't shake the sensation that his eyes were on me. It was like he was looking right into me, seeing things no one should. I couldn't stop my hands from trembling slightly, and I found myself staring at him, unable to look away. The rain was relentless, each droplet hitting the pavement with a soft, persistent patter. My breath caught in my throat, my eyes flicking to the man again. He didn't look away. He didn't move an inch, except to take another small step forward. This time it was more noticeable. It was as if he was closing the distance between us, slowly but surely. And then I realized that I wasn't just imagining it. He had shifted, and now he was standing much closer than before. I checked my phone again. 12:40 a.m. The bus was still nowhere in sight. I should have felt relieved because at least I wasn't the only one stranded in this awful weather. But all I felt was dread. My mind raced. Why was he standing there? Why hadn't he moved at all until now? I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he was just waiting for someone, like I originally thought. Maybe it was a coincidence that we both happened to be standing here, but my gut told me otherwise. Then he took another step. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and my heart began to pound in my ears. Something wasn't right. I wasn't imagining it anymore. He wasn't just standing there for no reason. He wasn't just waiting for a bus. He was doing something. Watching me. Waiting for me. I couldn't stand there any longer. I turned and began walking briskly, hoping to get away from his gaze. My shoes splashed against the wet pavement as I moved faster, not looking back, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing over my shoulder. The red umbrella. It was still there, but now it was even closer. It wasn't just the rain that made me feel like I was drowning. The feeling of his eyes on me, the pressure building in my chest, made the world around me feel suffocating. The city felt too quiet, too still. I had to get away. I didn't know why, but every step I took made my legs move faster, my heart racing ahead of my feet. I didn't even care about the bus anymore. I just needed to put distance between us. I turned the corner onto a side street, hoping it would take me toward a busier area, hoping to find somewhere I could lose myself in the crowd. But as I turned, I heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard them again. The sound of shoes splashing in the puddles behind me, just faintly at first. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but there was no mistaking it. The man was following me. I quickened my pace, my feet moving faster than I could consciously control. My mind was racing. What did he want? Why was he following me? I didn't even dare to look back. I just kept moving, cutting through an alley in the hopes of losing him. But the moment I turned the corner, I ran straight into him. I wasn't prepared. My body slammed against something hard, and before I could react, I felt a cold, strong hand grip my wrist. Another hand clamped over my mouth, silencing the scream that I couldn't even get out. I was spun around, and there he was. Close, too close. The red umbrella had fallen to the ground, forgotten, discarded, as he pulled me against him. The wet fabric of his coat pressed against me, and I could feel the slickness of it through my clothes. I struggled, but it was like trying to move against concrete. His grip was too strong. His breath was hot and ragged against my ear. Then I saw it. A flash of metal, sharp and gleaming under the faint streetlight. The knife was in his hand. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. My heart thundered in my chest. He was going to hurt me. He was here for a reason. I had no idea what it was, but I knew one thing. I had to get away. I kicked out wildly, my foot landing hard on his shin. He grunted, momentarily loosening his grip, just enough for me to jerk away. I shoved with everything I had, feeling the adrenaline surge through my body. I managed to break free. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away from him. My legs burned as I sprinted down the alley, the rain blurring my vision, my breathing coming in gasps. The sound of his footsteps was gone, but I didn't stop. Not until a porch light flicked on in the distance, and a dog barked loudly. That brief distraction was enough to send me bolting out into the street. A car's headlights appeared as I reached the sidewalk, its tires screeching to a halt as it swerved to avoid me. I didn't stop running. I just kept moving. The sound of the car's horn echoed in my ears, but I couldn't afford to look back. Finally, I found myself standing in the middle of the street, gasping for breath, drenched and shaken. I turned around, searching for any sign of him, the man with the red umbrella. But there was nothing. No sign of him. No footsteps. No umbrella. Only the rain. I never saw him again, but I'll never forget that feeling. The feeling of being watched. The sensation that someone, somewhere, was always waiting. If you ever find yourself alone on a rainy night, somewhere out of sight, and you see a man standing still with a red umbrella, don't look at him. Don't even acknowledge him. Just walk away. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm just an ordinary guy, nothing special. My name's William, and I work as a server at a small restaurant downtown in Tampa, Florida. It's not the kind of job that gets you noticed, nothing glamorous about it, but it pays the bills, and it keeps me busy enough that I don't think too much about anything outside of work. I'm just your average 20-something, trying to get by in a city that's always too hot, too humid, and a little too crowded for my taste. But that night changed everything. I had just finished my shift at the restaurant, one of those late-night closing shifts where you scrub the tables, wipe down counters, and make sure everything is clean before heading home. It's always a bit of a hassle, but at the end of the night, when you're tired and looking forward to getting into bed, all you can think about is getting the heck out of there. It was around midnight when I finally got out of the restaurant, the heavy doors of the place creaking behind me as I stepped into the thick Florida air. The storm had started earlier in the evening, but now it was in full force. The sky was pitch black, only lit up by the occasional flash of lightning in the distance. The rain was coming down in sheets, pounding against the concrete, and the wind howled, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and humidity. I'm not a fan of driving in weather like that. It makes everything feel so much more isolated, like you're the only one left in the world. The streets were almost empty, save for the occasional passing car. I don't think it was just the weather keeping people indoors, but also the late hour. Tampa doesn't sleep, but it sure quiets down when the rain falls hard. I turned the key in the ignition and the engine sputtered to life. The windshield wipers came on with a soft whir, pushing the rain off the glass with slow, rhythmic sweeps. The sound of them working against the downpour was oddly calming, drowned out the noise of my thoughts for a while. I was exhausted. All I wanted was to get home, have a hot shower, and crash for the night. I merged onto the road, steering my old sedan through the slick streets. The headlights cut through the dark, barely illuminating the road ahead. The rain hit the windshield with such force that it felt like someone was throwing pebbles at the car. It was hard to see far ahead, but the familiar routes were etched into my memory, and I wasn't concerned. Not yet. The closer I got to home, the quieter the streets became. Tampa can be a busy city, but on nights like this, it felt like the world just disappeared. There were no pedestrians, no cars on the road, just me, my car, and the relentless downpour. It felt eerie, almost like I was driving through a ghost town. I had the windows cracked slightly to let the cool air in, but the dampness outside was thick and oppressive, making it feel like you were submerged underwater. The low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and I could feel my eyes growing heavy, the exhaustion from my long shift beginning to settle in. My mind was already drifting to the comfort of my bed. But then, I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow moving under the dim glow of a street lamp. But as I got closer, I saw the figure more clearly. A man. He was walking along the side of the road, his head bowed low beneath the hood of his jacket, his body hunched against the storm. I couldn't make out his face at all. His hood was pulled so far down that it seemed like he was trying to hide from the rain, though at this point the rain was coming down so hard, nothing could keep you dry. There was something off about the way he walked, though. He wasn't moving quickly, wasn't even moving with any real purpose. He just shuffled along, like he was exhausted, or maybe lost. I couldn't tell, but there was something unsettling about it. You know that feeling you get when you spot something out of place, but you can't figure out what exactly is wrong? That's what I felt when I saw him. For a brief moment, I thought about just driving past him, not getting involved. It's late, the rain is making everything feel surreal, and I'm tired. But as I got closer, I couldn't ignore the fact that he looked completely out of place. In a storm like this, who would be walking along the side of the road at this hour? I slowed down as I neared him, unsure of what to do. My headlights illuminated his figure more clearly now, and I could see the heavy, soaked fabric of his clothes. He was drenched, his pants sticking to his legs, his shoes so waterlogged they seemed to squelch with every step. Still, he kept walking, slowly, methodically, like he had nowhere else to be. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the instinct to help, or maybe it was just the curiosity of why he was out there in the first place. Whatever it was, I slowed the car even more, rolling down my window just a crack, the cold, wet air rushing in. "Hey," I called out, my voice barely carrying over the rain. "You need a ride?" There was no immediate response. I waited for a second, but all I could hear was the sound of the rain battering against the roof of the car. The man didn't even glance over at me. I wasn't sure if he heard me or not. I thought maybe he hadn't noticed me slowing down. Maybe he was so lost in his own thoughts that he didn't hear my offer. I was just about to roll the window back up and continue on my way when he slowly turned his head towards me. The movement was almost too slow, like he was stiff, like it hurt to move. His eyes were hidden in the shadow of his hood, but I could feel his gaze on me, even if I couldn't see it. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. It was the barest of movements, but enough for me to see it clearly. "Where are you headed?" I asked, not sure what I was expecting him to say. "Up ahead," was all he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. It was soft, almost drowned out by the storm, but there was something about the way he spoke that made me uneasy. His words didn't make sense. "Up ahead?" I thought to myself. How vague could you get? But before I could think more about it, he opened the passenger door. He didn't say a word, just climbed in, his wet clothes squishing as he settled onto the seat. I didn't know why, but I felt a chill run down my spine as I locked the door behind him, the strange unease growing stronger in my chest. He didn't speak once he was inside. The only sound was the soft squelching of his clothes, the faint smell of mildew and dampness filling the car as the rain continued to fall in sheets outside. I glanced at him, and though I could barely make out his features, there was something about the way he sat there that made my stomach tighten. He was just too still. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. But the rational part of me said I was just being paranoid. He was just a guy caught in the rain, stranded, and I'd given him a ride. I had to stop overthinking everything, right? I pushed down the unease and tried to make some small talk. "Where you headed?" I asked again, trying to keep my voice casual, but it came out more nervous than I intended. "Up ahead," he repeated, his voice flat, almost monotone. It didn't seem to matter what I asked. He just kept giving me the same vague answer. Something was definitely wrong. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound in the car being the constant whoosh of the windshield wipers. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. My gut was telling me this wasn't just some ordinary person trying to escape the storm. I kept stealing glances at him in the rearview mirror, but all I could make out was the shadow of his hood and his soaked clothes, his stillness growing more unsettling with each passing second. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just tired. The night had been long, and I'd been on my feet for hours. It's easy to let your imagination run wild when you're exhausted, right? I told myself that's all it was. But the further I drove, the more uncomfortable I became. I asked him where he was going exactly. He just mumbled, "Up ahead." "Where exactly?" I asked him again, a little louder this time. "Just keep going," he said, his words barely audible over the sound of the rain. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something about his voice, something about the way he wasn't really saying anything, just vague half answers that made no sense. But I couldn't turn back now, could I? I had already made the decision to pick him up, so I just pressed on. The streets were getting quieter, more desolate the farther we went. There were fewer and fewer streetlights, and the rain didn't help either. It blurred everything around us. All I could hear was the constant whoosh of the windshield wipers, the hum of the tires against the slick road, and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. I tried to focus, but I kept sneaking glances at him. His face was still mostly hidden under the hood, but now that we were driving, there was something about him that was unsettling. He just sat there, stiff and silent, his fingers curled slightly around the seatbelt, not really doing anything. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't human in some way, like he was a part of the storm, a part of the night itself. He didn't feel like a person who belonged in the world. We passed by more dark streets, the kind that you only see in the middle of the night. Empty storefronts, parking lots abandoned at this hour. The rain was coming down even harder now, and I was trying to keep my eyes on the road, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing at him again. This time his head was turned slightly, and I could see a faint shadow of his face. That's when it hit me. I don't know why, but the moment I realized it, my entire body went cold. His face, it didn't look right. His skin was pale, almost sickly looking, and his eyes, when they caught the light for just a split second, looked empty, hollow, like he wasn't really there. Before I could think too much about it, the car came to a stop at a red light. The air was thick with tension, but then it happened. He lunged. I don't know what snapped inside him, but all of a sudden I felt a cold, wet hand clamp down hard on my wrist. It was like a vice, unyielding. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest, and before I could react, I saw it. A gleam, a flash of something sharp in the dim light, a knife. I could feel the cold steel pressing against my skin. It was so close, just a few inches away from my neck. "Just drive," he whispered, but his voice, it wasn't a request, it was an order. My mind went blank for a second. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had to think, had to get out of this. Adrenaline surged, and in a split second, I slammed my foot on the gas. The car jerked forward, and he was thrown against the passenger door. The knife pressed harder, and I could feel the cold steel against my skin. But I didn't hesitate. I kept my foot on the pedal, trying to shake him loose. His grip didn't loosen. It tightened, and for a moment it felt like I was stuck in some terrible nightmare I couldn't escape. But then I thought of something. A quick idea. Something desperate, but I had no choice. I slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, and the man flew forward, his body crashing into the dashboard. His hand loosened for just a moment, just enough. I kicked hard, my foot slamming into his ribs with all the strength I could muster. He grunted in pain, and I saw the moment of hesitation in his face. Without thinking, I shoved the door open. The wind and rain blasted into the car, and I forced him out onto the pavement. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud, but he was up in seconds, scrambling to his feet, his hood slipping back. For a split second, I saw his face in full light. I'll never forget it. His face wasn't just pale, it was twisted, contorted in rage, his eyes wide and wild. I didn't wait to see more. I slammed the door shut and floored the gas pedal. I didn't look back until I was miles away, heart still pounding. I pulled into the nearest gas station, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. My voice was so shaky when I gave them the details, the description of the man. But when they showed up, there was nothing. No sign of him. No one in the area had seen anything. It was like he had vanished into the night. I can't explain it. It doesn't make sense, but that man, he wasn't just stranded in the rain. He was something else entirely. And I've never felt safe driving through Tampa at night again. It was a humid summer evening in Jacksonville, Florida. The kind of heat that's so thick you could almost feel it sitting on your skin, pressing in around you like the air itself was trying to suffocate you. I had just finished my shift at the auto repair shop, covered in grease and engine oil, my clothes sticking to me like a second skin. It was around 11:45 p.m. when I finally turned down my street, the dim orange glow of the streetlights stretching out long shadows over the wet asphalt. The rain had been on and off all evening, leaving puddles on the ground that reflected the harsh lights from the houses around me. It was the kind of night where the air smells like damp earth and wet concrete. The sort of night where you can feel the weight of the humidity pressing down on you, making every movement feel like you're wading through thick fog. As I pulled into the driveway of my modest two-story home, I didn't feel the usual relief that came with being done for the day. The kind of feeling you get when you know you're finally home, away from the hustle and bustle. Instead, there was an unsettling sense of tension that sat heavy in the pit of my stomach. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the exhaustion from a long day catching up with me, but it didn't work. The house in front of me, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like it didn't belong to me, like something else was there, waiting. I parked my old beat-up sedan, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment. My headlights cut through the night, casting a yellowish glow on the driveway and the patch of overgrown grass in front of the porch. The rain was still coming down lightly. The sound of droplets tapping against my windshield was almost soothing in the otherwise still night. I grabbed my keys from the cup holder, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The air hit me immediately, hot and heavy, clinging to my skin. I made my way up the cracked walkway to the front door, the faint sound of my shoes tapping against the concrete. The sound felt too loud, echoing in the stillness. It was when I reached the door that I noticed it. It was barely cracked open. A thin sliver of darkness peeked through the opening. My stomach dropped. I've lived in that house for about a year now, and I always make sure to lock the door when I leave. I check it more than once, and I check it hard. I know I locked it. I remember doing it. I always do. But there it was, the door slightly ajar, the dark shape of the inside of my house almost inviting me in like it was something familiar, something that had been waiting for me. I stood there for a moment, frozen, my hands still gripping the cold metal of the doorknob. My first instinct was to turn around and walk back to the car, but that didn't make sense. I couldn't just leave. I had to go inside. But I also couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread creeping up my spine. I took a breath and pushed the door open, the sound of the hinges creaking in the silence of the night. The smell that hit me was the first thing I noticed, the musty, damp scent of the house, mixed with something else, a faint, sickly sweetness in the air. It made my throat tighten, like I was breathing in something that didn't belong. I stepped inside, but it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. The temperature inside the house was heavier than usual, like the air was thick and cloying. It almost felt like I had stepped into a sauna. The living room looked the same, the couch and coffee table sitting just where they always were, but the silence was deafening. No hum from the fridge, no ticking of the clock on the wall, no noise from the fans above. Just the sound of my breath and my heart hammering in my chest. I called out, my voice feeling small and weak in the vast emptiness. "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you question your own existence, like the whole world is holding its breath. My mind raced as I stepped further into the house, my eyes scanning the shadows, my pulse quickening with each passing second. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I had just left the door open by accident. Maybe the wind had pushed it. But I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut. Something was wrong. I moved down the hallway towards my bedroom, my footsteps slow and deliberate, as though any sudden movement might provoke something in the house. The hallway was dimly lit, the light from the living room barely reaching the far corners. The walls seemed to close in around me as I walked, and the air felt thicker the further I went. My breath grew shallow, my chest tight, like the house itself was suffocating me. I stopped when I reached the stairs leading up to the second bedroom. I didn't need to go up there, but something told me to look. Something deep in my gut telling me that if I didn't, I'd regret it. My eyes were drawn to the top of the stairs, to the dark, looming space beyond. The floorboards creaked slightly as if someone was walking above me. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Someone's upstairs. I froze, my body rigid with fear. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt the chill of terror crawl down my spine. My mind raced as I processed the thought. No, it couldn't be. I had checked the house before I left. There was no one here. It was just me. I didn't invite anyone over. I didn't have any plans. But that sound, that unmistakable creak of the floor above me, made it clear. I wasn't alone. I turned on my heel, panic surging through me. I needed to get out. Now. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I pulled it from my pocket. I dialed 911, my breath shallow and quick as I pressed the phone to my ear. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I think they're upstairs. The door was open and I didn't leave it like that. I need help. Stay calm, sir. Officers are on the way. I need you to stay outside. Stay on the line with me. I didn't need to be told twice. I didn't care if the rain was falling harder now, or if my shoes were getting soaked in the mud. I didn't care about anything except getting out of that house. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but somehow I made it to the front door. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air slapping me in the face like a bucket of ice water. The rain was coming down in sheets now, the sound of it filling my ears, but it didn't do anything to stop the pounding in my chest. My phone was shaking in my hand as I kept it pressed to my ear, listening to the dispatcher's calm voice telling me to stay put. Minutes dragged by, feeling like hours. Every second felt like it was stretching on, the waiting unbearable. Finally, I saw the flashing red and blue lights in the distance, cutting through the rain like a beacon. Relief flooded me. I wasn't alone anymore. The officers were here. They would handle it. They would... The sound of the squad cars pulling up snapped me out of my thoughts. Two officers stepped out, their figures outlined by the harsh lights of their patrol vehicles. Guns drawn, they moved swiftly, like they had done this 1,000 times before. I followed them as they entered the house, staying close behind them, not daring to go any further. I stood by the door, trying to stay calm as the officers moved through the house. My pulse was still racing, my mind spinning. What if they didn't find anything? What if it was just my imagination? The thought terrified me more than anything else. The idea that I might have overreacted, that I had called the police for nothing. Then the radio crackled. "We've got a man hiding under the bed in the master bedroom." My stomach twisted. My knees went weak, and I felt like I was going to collapse right there in the doorway. The officer's voice was strained, like he was trying to process what he had just found. "He's not armed, but he's definitely been here a while. I don't know if he was just a burglar or if he had more sinister intentions." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Even though the police had arrested the man, yet the fear lingered. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the Vault awaits your return.